Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. Welcome to Moving Conversations. As always, I'm Brian Ritchie, and joining me is
Nora St. John.
Yeah, we come to you every week and talk about different topics on the world of movement, fitness, Pilates, etc. And today, we decided to go into our bag of tricks a little bit, tell some stories on clients and case studies, but tell these stories in a sense that we're really talking about the art of listening. So really what we want to focus on is how do we listen better? Because as movement professionals and as teachers, let's face it, listening is one of our greatest tools.
What we hear, how we hear it, the tips and the tricks we pick up, the breadcrumbs, I say, it's like little breadcrumbs that follow you to the root of the problem, for example, or to an underlying something that they don't know is there or is way buried in their past that often can be the underlying reason for what they're experiencing now. So it's just that way of how do you listen for all those tips, all those little tidbits of information that are useful for us as we go forward and try to figure out and make them move better.
Absolutely. When you first started, when you were first, baby Pilates instructor, were you ever taught how to listen? Did anybody ever say, now here's what you really want to do. Here's what you're listening for. Here's, exactly what you're supposed to do when you're talking to someone. Did anybody tell you? No one talked to me like that.
No, and not only did they not talk to you like that, but it was almost, so much of the training that I think both of us have been through is based on, assessment, looking at what their body's doing and what their range of motion is like and whether they're moving in a coordinated fashion. And all those things are certainly important to what we do. But just as important, or most, I would argue, really more important is how do you listen and what are you listening for? What information are you actually trying to get out of that conversation? It's not just their history or what they've done or what they do for a living. It's like those other more subtle pieces of how do they relate to their body? How do they approach their daily activities? Are there things that they have a problem with that they're not quite talking to you about yet, right? All those little subtle tips and tricks that you hear from them, those little clues and cues that come in.
Well, if you think about it, we often hear the term reading between the lines, but for us, it's almost listening between the lines.
Yeah.
We're trying to listen to what they're not saying sometimes. We're trying to get a little deeper and be able to ask the right questions to draw that out for some people. Or like you said, to leave the breadcrumbs, trying to figure out, okay, what exactly do I see? Why do I see it? Why is this presenting itself as such? So let's break down listening for a moment. Let's break it down into the different parts that we want to address. So first, with our ears, which is the obvious one, but we're going to talk about more of the senses than just that today. So with our ears, what are you listening for when a client's talking to you?
So probably 3 or 4 key things. So I'm listening for just the facts, if you will, right? What's their situation? What body part is bothering them? What do they do? I'm listening for the facts is kind of a step one, right? Then I'm looking for their experience of those facts, right? Like some people, people can talk about exactly the same experience. I had knee surgery. A had knee surgery, B had knee surgery. But their experiences with that are completely different. One was like, yeah, it was easy, no problem. I got over it really fast. The other one's like, yeah, it's been 6 months later and my knee's still swelling and I'm still in pain. So not just for the facts, but kind of what their experience of those facts is. Then I'm also always at a maybe more subtle level listening for their relationship to their body, which is part of that, their relationship to their body, their relationship to movement, how they express themselves. Some people are really dramatic in how they express themselves, and everything is very, very exaggerated and colorful and kind of dramatic. And other people, it's like they're very stoic.
Yes.
And they can be talking about something really horrific with a complete blank face on. And so then I just start to understand where their communication volume is, if you
Mm-hmm.
will, and how closely I have to listen. Some are going to over exaggerate things and tell me like everything's terrible and like broke a nail. Other people are going to under exaggerate things and be in excruciating pain, act like nothing's wrong. So listening for all those things, the facts, the how they're relating to their experience, or the emotional relationship to the experience, their communication style, and then how I can best, and then how they're relating to me too. I'm looking at that. They seem to be listening to me. They seem to be trusting me. What's happening with that as well?
What you just said is very interesting because with the stoic person versus the over exaggerator, I find that that's going to tell me a lot about their personality in general.
Yep.
Because I had a client who came to me with, when I say extreme knee pain, I mean she was extreme knee pain. Uh, Everything hurt. But she was so stoic, and she was almost able to put the pain to the side and just get through life without really looking at it. It's kind of like, it's there, it's always there. I'm going to ignore you. You're not bothering me. And she was also someone who had developed a very high pain tolerance to the point that and it runs in the family, I guess, because even her son, she said, yeah, we don't do Novocaine when we go to the dentist, and things like that. I'm thinking, wow. So what that taught me, honestly, was, okay, if she says she's at a level 2 of pain, I have to assume that she's at a 5 or a 6 because her pain tolerance was so high and she's so stoic that I can't see it on her face. Normally we can see it in the eyes. They blink or they grimace a little
Yeah.
bit. But with
Yeah.
her, nothing. And I'd say,
Wow.
a scale of 1 to 10, she'll go, 1.5. I'm like, okay. So I basically multiplied everything by 2. So I said, you're at a 3. Gotcha. And it was just one of those things. And come to find out, she needed knee surgery. But every time she went to the doctor would always ask the same question. And this is something we hear all the time. Can you walk for a mile? And we know our over exaggerators, oh no, I can't even go a block. And so then they sign up for surgery. Well, she thought was, if you are being forced to, if I had a gun to your head, could you walk a mile? And so she always said, yeah. And finally, the doctor just one day said, can you walk a mile comfortably? She said, comfortably? No, I can't walk down the hall comfortably. And then I said, okay, that changes the whole dynamic here. And she went in for knee surgery and she was so much better afterwards.
That's a great story.
You
That's a
know?
great story.
And it
Yeah.
was all about listening and seeing those reactions and being able to say, oh, okay. Because again, doctors don't have a whole lot of time. I had her multiple hours a week, and it took me a while to really figure out what that was and where her level was. And so, sometimes it is, you're hearing the words, but it's also listening with a little bit more of an understanding of, okay, she's going to be stoic. She has a high pain tolerance. Okay, what does this mean to me as the instructor?
Yeah. One other thing that I'd bring out of that, which I think you illustrated by the doctor saying, can you do it comfortably? Right, is one of the things that I ran into is clients who don't tell you everything that they're doing,
Yes.
right? Just clients who really leave key pieces of their physical activity out for you. And sometimes you're just not going to think about asking that question, but it is one of those things of, if something isn't adding up, because I suspect for her that something was not adding up for you. You're feeling a dissonance between what you saw in terms of her movement patterns and how she was experiencing that and what she was saying, right? You felt a
Yep.
disconnect there. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So then how do you get through that disconnect? Right? Like you ask more questions. What do you do here? What do you do in the morning? What is your daily routine like? What is your desk like? What is your, if you're an athlete of some kind, what kind of court are you playing on? If it's tennis,
Mm-hmm.
for example, like sometimes you got to really just dig in funny ways. And there's one story I tell about that occasionally, and it's about one client who came in with hip and shoulder pain, or it's actually, sorry, hip and low back pain. And and she'd had it for quite some time, and it was really not getting any better. And I said, well, what do you do? And she was an office worker. She was a city worker. And And she wasn't particularly physical. She did a little bit of walking, but not a whole lot else. And it was like, well, when does it bother you the most? She says, well, it bothers me when I sit. It bothers me when I stand. It bothers me, a lot of the time. And, I worked with her, did all the things I usually do, working on range of motion and working on getting strength. And she would feel better after each session, but it wouldn't really make a difference. The next time she'd come in and, pain level would be roughly the same, functional limitation would be roughly the same. And finally, after really a while, like it was at least 4 or 6 weeks, I said, is there anything else I need to know? Like, what else are you doing in your day? Because things just weren't adding up. And she said, oh, well, I do meditation and I sit in full lotus for 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening.
Wow.
Now, if you think about that position, right, your hips are in extreme external rotation and your knees are a little bit torqued and you're sitting in a position with your back for 2 hours quietly still a day on top of an office job,
Right.
where she was also in a desk all day. And I was like, oh, well, that was an important piece of information that absolutely I needed to know. So I worked with her on her meditation position and just had her change that for a while, and her hip and low back pain went away.
Yep.
But it was like that information, she just thought, I'm sure she thought of that as private and something that was part of kind of her spiritual practice that I didn't need to know about,
Sure.
not feeling or understanding the physical nature of what that was.
Yep. I also find that with certain clients, they don't tell you about things like, I may ask them a lot of what we're doing during the initial assessment and whatnot is we are listening to, we're asking certain questions that we've asked 1,000 times before, but we often have to dig deeper. So ask the follow-up question and then another follow-up question, another follow-up question. So it hurts when you sit. Okay, when does it bother you the most? Oh, I notice it when I'm driving. Oh, well, what kind of car do you drive? Going that next level, because I'm a car guy, I do understand, and I travel enough that I've rented a lot of cars, so I can say, oh, okay, yeah, that car is a little lower to the ground, or that SUV, I've ridden in it before. The seats can be uncomfortable, or whatever. And sometimes I'll even go to their car and help them adjust it so that they're in a little better ergonomic position. But what they may not tell you is that they also, have a second car that they drive occasionally, or whatnot. And if they don't tell you that, and suddenly they come back from a long weekend and they have extreme back pain, and they say, "Oh yeah, I took a drive." Oh, okay. You went to the Eastern Shore and back, and for us, it's a couple hours. Oh, okay, cool. I'm thinking it's the same car, but in reality, it might be, the little roadster that they have that's a lot lower to the ground and a lot more uncomfortable and all this kind of stuff, but it's a hot looking car and that the wind is in their hair and they're not thinking about it. I'm like, oh, okay, we have to work on that too. So sometimes it's digging at that next layer.
Yeah. Yeah. Very often, right? With pain, it's always, you're trying to uncover as best you can the root of the issue, if there is one, right? Like what, or the exacerbation. What is exacerbating this? Why is it worse today than it was yesterday? Yeah, and you've always got to look at as many things as you can, and they're not going to tell you a lot of those things because they just don't think about it. They just don't think it matters, or they don't realize what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. They don't see 2 and 2 equaling 4 for us, where we can see how they're sitting, how they're standing, how they're moving, and how they walk in, how they go upstairs. All these things can tell us a story. Their body is literally telling us a story every time. And if you've worked with a client for any length of time, as you probably know, different seasons, things change with their bodies, especially our gardeners who, I mean, I don't know how many times you've heard this, but a client will come in and say, "You hurt me so bad last week." I'm like, what did I do? I'm looking through the chart going, we did nothing that new that you've never done before. If I experiment, I usually mark it down. I said, okay, this is odd if you had a bad reaction, and then you have to dig in. You have to ask those questions. And then they'll say, well, I also spent 4 hours working in the garden on Saturday. And I said, oh, did you now? Because I saw you on Monday. The first question I ask is, when did the pain start? Over the weekend.
Yeah.
Oh, we saw each other on Monday. Chances are you weren't hurt from the exercises if it didn't bother you until Saturday. And you dig deeper and you dig deeper. And then they say, I spent a few hours working in the garden. I said, well, what were you doing? Weeding. Okay. Were you bending over a lot? Were you on your hands and knees? Were you, what position were you in? Oh, I was just bending over and yanking them out of the ground. I was like, well, no wonder your back is hurting. I mean, come on. So sometimes it's just getting that instead of taking that ownership of,
Yeah.
oh, what did I do? And I had a PT tell me once, said, don't take ownership of all their aches and pains. Don't. Because
Yeah.
you see them for how many hours per week?
Exactly.
1, 2, 3 at the most. How many hours are they on their own? What are they doing
Yeah.
without you? Chances are that's when they got hurt.
Yeah, and I've had very similar experiences with that as well. And I always think of spring as being the dangerous time, at least here in California. People will start to garden in like, oh, usually March, April, something like that. And that's when they'll come in and go, oh, God, my back really hurts. You did something last week. I'm like, well, did I? My other classic was I had somebody come in again on a Monday, and I hadn't seen them since Thursday, right, or even Wednesday the previous week. Like, oh God, whatever we did last week really killed me. Da, 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 da. And they're going on and on. I'm feeling like concerned, if not exactly guilty yet. I'm feeling concerned. And I said, well, tell me about, when did you start hurting? And they said, well, I didn't really start hurting until Sunday night. So I'm like, okay, well, that probably wasn't me. What'd you do over the weekend? Oh, well, my grandkid was in town. And we were working on a science project. And I was like, oh, well, what were you doing? He said, well, we were drawing these big maps of, the planet or something like that. And so they had big piece of paper down on the floor.
Yep.
And so he was basically kneeling and crawling around on the floor for a good 4 or 5 or 6 hours over the weekend. Right. And this is somebody whose low back is, a little iffy, and whose knees are a little iffy, his hips are a little iffy. So I'm thinking, well, probably that was it, not me. It's always good to take that moment when somebody accuses you of something.
Yes.
To go, well, was it me or was it you? Because it could be either. Like sometimes I make a poor choice, and
Absolutely.
I acknowledge that. But same thing with look at the chart, and we didn't do anything. Like we did nothing that has ever caused you trouble before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that digging deeper when we're trying to uncover those layers. And again, going back to the assessment, when you're meeting someone for the first time, it can be challenging. You and I were discussing this before, especially being a male, because let's say I have a female in front of me. Well, because of what I do, a lot of times they will share sometimes too much information, and that's fine. But certain areas of their body, I don't feel comfortable, asking about, and they probably don't just want to tell me about. And, so they may have some pelvic floor dysfunction. How I've gotten around that is just, do you have any kids? Oh, how many? Because if they've had more than one, chances are their pelvic floor may or may not have issues. There's a possibility, but that'll at least point me in a direction that I might say, oh, okay, you have low back pain and you've had multiple children. Okay. And then I might say, okay, is this maybe a little bit of a question here, but have you ever laughed really, really hard and had a little bit of leakage? And almost everybody goes, yes. And I've given them permission to talk about it now, without going too far, without asking if they have a sexual dysfunction or something of that nature. You try and make it kind of funny, have you ever laughed really hard, and then it can open them up a little bit. I find that helps. And with my guys, well, the last thing that they want to talk about is erectile dysfunction. So they're never going to talk about their pelvic floor. And that you really have to sort of go around the block, down the alley, and all sorts of ways to get at any, thing. I was working with someone for quite a while, had no idea until I got their physical therapist notes. The PT sent me, a lot of notes, and I was taking my time and going through, and then I realized each time they were mentioning, sexual dysfunction, because that was what he went to the doctor for. And everything is circling back to the pelvic floor for the physical therapist. But he wasn't telling me any of this. But as the practitioner, would it help me to know all of this? Oh my gosh. So again, once I had that information, I knew I didn't necessarily have to confront him about it. I just knew the information now, and I could, change what I was doing. But sometimes trying to get that information out of them can be rather challenging.
And I liked what you said, because we were talking about this a little bit earlier, and you said you gave a couple of strategies for this, which I really liked. So I think one is, of course, trying to make light of it, finding a way to ask the question without going like, "Excuse me, but do you leak when you sneeze?" Like that's a little rude. But I like you kind of back your way into it and make it a little bit of a joke or make it something light, right? You also said that you used a story about perhaps a real, perhaps a fictional other client, and just said, hey, this other client who has had these kind of issues, and you just kind of mentioned
Yep.
them as gently as you can. We've really had some good luck working on them, da 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 da, right?
Yep.
And then that client hears that and thinks, oh, that's me. I haven't said anything. And then, a couple of weeks later, they may say, hey, you mentioned this client. I had the same issues. Would you be willing to, help me on that as well? So I think that's one really a good approach. How do you address complicated issues like that?
Yep.
On the female side, some of that is mastectomies, breast enhancement, and breast reduction.
Yes.
Right? Because, breast enhancement, you can often tell if there's been breast enhancement.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to tell you that they've had that surgery.
Yep.
Typically. Sometimes they do, but a lot of times they don't. And you know it. You look at them and go, well, those look like there's been a little help there. Or breast reduction. And both of those, and certainly mastectomy as well, which they may mention, because typically they're going to tell you if they've had cancer or some other kinds of issues. But with both of those, there's a lot of things that happen to the tissues on the chest wall, right? There can be scarring, there can be changes in range of motion in the shoulders. They can often get kind of little rounded shoulders or other kinds of just changes in posture and myofascial balance, that whole area. And if they don't mention that to you, then you've got, you can tell if they've had a breast enhancement usually. And I'll often then just say, okay, well, I see whether they see it or not that they've had this. And so I'm going to address range of motion in the shoulder girdle, in the scapula, and their whole posture, their whole upper body, because whether they're going to tell me that or not, that's often an issue, right? So it's kind of like I take that, I'm just going to go around them essentially and do what I think they need, whether they tell me that or not.
Right.
Right. And that's a little bit the same issue with the pelvic floor issue is if I have somebody who's had 3 or 4 children and, is really of a certain age, I'm going to assume there may be some pelvic floor issues there, whether there are or not. And I'm going to give them exercise that would be appropriate for that. Even if they don't mention something to me.
It's funny when you said breadcrumbs, and this is going toward that. One of my favorite comedians is Hannah Gadsby, and she used the term Hansel and Greteling it. And literally that's what you're doing. And sometimes you have to do that. It's like, follow me, here you go. And you're just, you're drawing them in. And really you have to do that in a safe way. And using another person, a story of, and often it's fictional, but sometimes it's not. And, or if I sometimes think that might happen, if I'm working with a couple, I may do the Hansel and Greteling to the woman. Without saying anything about it being your husband, just and see if they say something, because they may say, oh, well, has John said something to you? I said, oh, no, I was talking about this other. I said, oh, well, we're experiencing. I said, oh, okay, well, there might be some things that I can help with on that. So that's another way that I find that I can do that. If I have a couple. But you're right. And it usually takes about 2 to 3 sessions if I'm dealing with, especially men, right away. Women, on the other hand, if I throw the bait out there, a lot of times they'll say, oh, I have that. And they're a lot more open to it. I find men, the embarrassment factor, I think, is a little higher when it comes to dysfunction of that sort. So it takes 2 or 3 sessions, and then they'll come back and say, you remember that story you told me? I was like, oh, that was a long time ago. Yeah. About this other well, it's like, oh, gotcha. Say, oh, no big deal. We can, and make it very light, not joke about it, but make it not that heavy. Lighten it up just a little bit so that they're not worried about it and be like, oh, no problem. I said, there's a ton of exercises we can do to help with that. So why don't we focus on that a little bit, And they usually go, really? Oh, but make sure it doesn't mess up my golf game. Oh, don't worry. It'll help your golf game. Oh, side note, one of the best things that I've ever done, because I've had doctors tell me for clients with prostate issues and things like this, they need to get their Kegels working. They need to work their pelvic floor. And I will tell almost every single one of them who plays golf, you get your pelvic floor working, you start hitting the ball further and straighter. And they start working that pelvic floor, man, like you would not believe. It's great and it works. And they say, I am. I say, yeah, because you're actually tightening things up the way, you kind of need to down there. Things aren't loosey-goosey. They say, oh my gosh, it's great. Well, good. And like the commercial says, and your wife will be happy too.
Which gets us to that idea of part of communication is creating motivation.
Oh, yes.
Right. And especially when somebody has something pretty recalcitrant or pretty painful or something that really is limiting their life in various ways. Finding that key to keep them motivated is another part of that communication story. For this one, I have a client who, she had arthritis everywhere, her feet, her knees, her back, her shoulders. Things hurt most of the time. She was on heavy duty. This was, before a lot of the issues with NSAIDs, but heavy duty and anti-inflammatories for kind of all the time, which just kept her pain kind of manageable.
Right.
And she kind of hated working out because things didn't feel good, like things weren't comfortable. And so it took us a while to develop really a routine that didn't irritate her and helped to make her stronger. We pretty much stuck to that routine then. It was not the most stimulating session because it's like, we're going to do 10 of these, we're going to do 5 of these, we're going to do 6 of these. But basically her motivation was, and it took me a little while to kind of figure out, like, why are you here? What's important to you? She and her husband used to go on these pretty exotic vacations to various places like the Azores and, islands you've never heard of and things like that, in search of various adventures. And she was maybe 5 feet tall, maybe 5. She's really short. And she needed to get, and they ended up on a lot of buses and trains and things like that. And if you've ever been on those, you know that often that first step is kind of killer to get up onto a bus or onto a train, especially when you're really short. And so that was her motivation, was basically being able to travel and being able to get in and out of odd situations and be comfortable in an airplane, that kind of thing. So we would do these exercises like this in Pilates world on the chair, where you basically step on the pedal, right? You're just pushing the pedal down, which is basically like stepping up onto a bus, right? Or stepping up onto a train. And she was so funny because she said, every time she did that exercise, she said, I hate this exercise. And I hate you for giving me this exercise. And I said, just remember the next bus you're going to get on. She said, I know, that's why I do this. Right. But that, it's fine. I mean, I have no issue with that. But that was, she had a motivation that was clear in her mind, which allowed her to keep doing stuff she really didn't want to do. And it helped, right? That allowed her to make progress and to be able to keep doing what she wanted to do.
Absolutely. Motivation is so important. Whether it be something like my golfers, almost any time I find that a client, especially a golfer or a tennis player, that needs a certain range of motion increase, thoracic rotation, whatever it is, or hips, or I need to focus somewhere, I always tell them, this is going to help your golf game. And every time they're going to say, oh, how often should I do it? Every day. If I tell them every day, I'm lucky to get it 3 times a week, but at least they'll be consistent.
Yeah.
And if they say, it hasn't really been helping, I say, really? How often have you done? Oh, I probably haven't done it enough. I'm going to start doing it more. Great. Sometimes you have to push that motivation. But it does work. It does work a lot of times. So getting the right motivation for the client. And again, for some, like we were just talking about for gardening, to say, okay, you're going to be gardening. And I had a client who turned their entire backyard into this massive garden. And I said, okay, so it's not as though you're not going to be down on your hands and knees, and it's not like you're going to have perfect posture bending forward at staying in the sagittal plane. It's not like you're going to rotate. So guess what? We probably have to do things that are going to involve that. Maybe teach you slightly better ergonomics to protect you when you can, but also do some preventative stuff, because chances are you're not going to be 100% perfect alignment or orientation to whatever you're doing. So it's sort of like, okay, it tells me by listening to that and having them tell me what they're doing and for how many hours a week or a day, say, okay, so now here's how we want to teach you to lift properly. Here's how we want to do this. Now we know you're not going to always lift properly, so we're also going to train you maybe at a slightly different angle. We're going to have you rotate a little bit when you squat. We're going to have you, do a little bit of a reach, not to the point where you're going to hurt yourself, but begin to explore those ranges of motion so that when you do it in real life, you don't blow your back out.
Yeah, so this is that other part of listening, right? Is what are they doing? An example I have is one tennis player that I had who was older. She was an older woman, and she had some hip issues. And I had an assumption, because she was a quite regular tennis player. I think she played twice a week. I had this assumption about how she was playing tennis. Right? I assumed she was, moving quickly and responding to the ball and that kind of thing. And one day, and this was after a while, I kind of said, well, why don't you bring in your racket and just let me just see how you're moving on the court, basically. And she came in, and it was kind of fascinating because it was like a butterfly was playing tennis. She moved rather slowly and kind of like dink, 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 hit, dink, 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 hit. And it was just funny. I just was not expecting that.
Yeah.
Because based on that, I was assuming she was actually in just better physical shape than she was, kind of more strength and more endurance, which was clearly like when I saw her actually moving as she thought she would be on the tennis court, I realized, oh, she doesn't have speed. She doesn't have a lot of confidence in her legs and how they're moving her. And she really doesn't even have necessarily the strength that she probably needs. And I think she was in her late 70s at that point. So it's like, oh, and it was one of those things where I made an assumption, like you were saying earlier, based on what she told me about her activities and how often she did them, of her fitness level.
Yep.
And it wasn't until I actually kind of watched her do those that I went, oh, her fitness level is not what I was assuming it was.
Yep.
So we started working on, just a little more basic strength and endurance and that kind of thing. And it made some difference in her hip, not as much as I'd hoped, but it makes some difference in her hip. And it did improve her tennis game as well. So that was the good news on that. But again, it was that I was making an assumption based on the story, and it didn't turn out to be accurate. So that's the other thing, is just always digging through your assumptions.
Yeah, but also something else that you did. So getting back to sort of the art of listening, we talked about listening with our ears, but realistically, we need to listen with all of our senses. Well, except for taste. I find that doesn't work. But, we want to also use our eyes. And that's what you just did.
Yeah.
And you and I have talked about that a number of times. We've spoken and taught, assessment techniques and things. It's all about watching. People say, well, how did you know this or that? And I had a gentleman who came in who's this big black basketball player, and he's, tall, 6'3", young. He's 19 years old, and sort of athletic. He weighs like 130 pounds though at that height, so he's very, very thin. And he had this back problem. And in watching him move, and I watched him, do things, and everything he performed was with his right hand. But I was watching him and the way he elevated his left shoulder and the rotation he had in his torso. I said, "You're left-handed, aren't you?" And he said, "How did you know?" And I said, I said, "The way you write," I said, "you hug the paper. You take your hand all the way over so you can get your hand out of the way." He said, "Exactly." I said, "I can see it in the way your shoulders and your thoracic is rotated to the right, and how you're slumped over." And I said, "Your body's telling me this." And I learned that by watching. I didn't watch him write. I wasn't paying attention to him filling out the forms because, he's a young kid. I didn't think that was going to be an issue. I watched some of my older clients, the way they move, but here this kid comes bouncing in and everything. I didn't think about it. And, he dribbled the ball with his right hand. I mean, everything about it. He said, "Yeah, I do all my sports with my right hand. I learned how to do that, but I am left-handed." I said, "Okay, we need to unwind the body." Got it. But it told me, by watching him, it told me what we needed to do next.
Yeah, exactly. And so much of our assessment is visual. right? That's when we're watching movement, we're looking for symmetry, we're looking for alignment, we're looking for coherency, we're looking for all the, harmony, we're looking for all strength and movement and range of
Yep.
motion, all the things we're looking for. One of the things that I mention every now and then is that lack of coherency between what you see and what they say. Right? That there's often this moment of like somebody says something, either they're not in pain at all or they're in a lot of pain, and what you're seeing tells you a completely different story. So one of the things that I say about that is when I've got a client, and I think of one client particularly with this, they had a car accident, right? And so they had a lot of neck and shoulder pain, and they had a whiplash. And they came in and they lay down on the mat, and and they're like, oh, every movement was kind of slightly painful, and they were very sensitive, and they moved very slowly, and they were breathing through everything, and it was like, somewhat excruciating experience for them. So we just were very, very gentle and calm and quiet, kind of getting their neck to start to move again. And then the second the session was over, literally the second the session was over, she jumped up, ran to her purse, threw it on her shoulder, and ran out the door, like aggressively. And the contrast between how she was experiencing her body when she was paying attention, which was that it was this delicate, kind of very fragile situation, and how she was treating it the rest of the time was profound.
Yeah.
And it was one of those like, okay, where is reality here? Like what's really happening here? And it took a while to kind of sort out, find the balance between those two things. So the next time she came in, I went a different way. I actually started from the outside in, rather than having her focus on her neck and focus on her pain and feel what was happening there. I said, well, let's just, we did some footwork, we did some feet-in straps, we did some whole body movement of various kinds that didn't involve her neck at all, or even her upper body. Started with that, kind of get things warm and moving, and then did some, very simple like bicep curls and some chest presses, with the on the machine on the reformer, and things that were more peripheral in a lot of ways. And then we started to think about the neck, and it was interesting because for her, if she was focusing on the neck, she was kind of a mess, and if she wasn't focusing on the neck, she did a lot of things. It's just this funny mix. And with her, I really had to start, I call it from the outside in. So I got a bunch of other things going, distracted her from the pain she was feeling, basically, and the focus on the neck. And then we did a little bit of neck work, kind of towards the last half of the session for like 5 minutes. And then we went back and did some more full body work.
Yep.
And that's how we had to approach it. It's like I kind of backdooring it.
Yep.
Like I want to get to the neck, but if I focus on it, it almost, their whole nervous system goes neck, 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 neck,
Yep.
pain, 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 right? And they can't get out of that.
Yep.
So I had to distract physically to other areas of the body and other experiences and sensations before we could really address the neck.
I call it sneaking up on them.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking of a client in particular who he was responding well. He had some low back stuff. He had a ton of foot stuff, but he had also some low back stuff. So we were doing a lot of basic mat stuff, and working through range of motion, pelvic tilt, all this kind of stuff. And he kept coming in saying, everything we did hurts. It hurts all the time. Nothing is helping. And he was complaining a ton. I'm thinking, your movement looks okay, though. There's nothing that looks like it would cause you, obviously during the exercises, he was doing fine. So he was having a reaction afterwards. So I just said, like you did, I said, in my mind, I said, okay. So he said, so I don't ever want to lay down, ever. I said, no problem. So I just said, you know what? We're going to ignore your core. We're going to do incidental core work. So I had him doing, one arm tube presses and rows and all this kind of stuff, making him stabilize in a standing position or a sitting position or even kneeling, put him on the ball, all these other things that still created that core, awareness and strength without him focusing on it.
Yep.
And we snuck up on it. And within a couple of weeks, I could put him back down on his back. And he said, oh yeah, this isn't bothering me anymore. I said, all right. But we had to sneak up on it because he was over heightened the awareness, and we had to calm that down. So yeah, we have a lot of people who need that.
Yeah. And I think about working with a lot of the chronic pain clients I've worked with. I was first starting out, I always felt like I had to really focus on their pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's happening with your back? 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 And modern pain science talks a lot about how when you do that, they just keep remembering how much their back hurts, and it really reinforces that pattern.
Yep.
And much like you, it's like that sneaking up on it, that going around the back door. It's how do I stimulate that area, or stimulate other areas, and really bring their mental focus to another part of the body. Because the other thing too is, all of you know this out there and listening land. If you ever have anything that hurts, that's taking up a huge part of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, the example I often use is a blister on your foot, right? It is in no way life-threatening. It is in no way going to cause you any real trouble over time, but you're like, my foot hurts, my foot hurts, my foot hurts, my foot hurts, right? That just becomes like this drumbeat in your head. And with clients, that's exactly what happens is they're like, my neck hurts, or whatever it is. And if I could get them to focus on their feet, like, let's do some footwork. Let's feel your heel. Let's feel some other part of your body.
Mm-hmm.
Let's feel the ball of your foot. Notice how your hips are feeling. How is, right? Taking the attention away from the injured area, because a lot of times the rest of the body's fine. It's not having a problem.
Yep.
It's just that one area. But pain will make them feel like their entire body is a mess. And no, just your neck, or just your right arm, or whatever it is.
Yep.
And really keeping that focus going.
There's a new theory in physical therapy that I found very interesting, which is to not treat sometimes the injured side.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a physical therapist friend of mine, and she said it blew her away watching other people do this. She went to a seminar and she said, I don't understand how it works, but I'm going to treat your right rotator cuff by training your left rotator cuff to do more. And all we're going to do is external rotations and internal and all this stuff on your left side and ignore your right side. But at the same time, I also understand the human body. Sometimes just to get them to move helps, and to train them on what they can do instead of having them focus on what they can't do.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Mentally can be a huge breakthrough. So, I have a client who can't, for whatever, she has a back thing, she can't squat. Squats are one thing she can't do, but she can lunge. So you know what? We lunge. That doesn't bother her. Cool. All right. I just don't have her do anything in a squatted position. And she feels fine. Again, finding what does work and sort of working with that. And again, it's watching a lot of her facial expressions. I tell my staff that all the time. When you're doing something with a client, a lot of times, like marching, do I have to watch their leg lift? No, I'm watching their spine. I'm watching, making sure that they're keeping neutral spine and things, but I'm also watching their face. I keep that in my peripheral, because if I see them squint, if I see them, any moment of hesitation, or I see, this wince in their face, you can tell that they have some discomfort. So that's another thing you can say, oh, well, that didn't work. Let's try something else. Without necessarily harping on it, you can just sort of say, yep, that didn't work. Let's try an overhead. Let's try moving your arms instead of your legs. Oh, and then I can visually see, okay, her face is calm, her neck is calm. Okay, this is working better. Let's work here for a session or two before we start doing something else. So by watching their body, it can really affect how I'm going to train them, where we're going to go with the programming, but also being able to keep them safe and hopefully calm down, like you said, that nervous system.
Yeah, and you're not just looking at the movement, you're looking at the reaction to the movement,
Yes.
right? You're looking at their emotional response to it, or their physical response to it. And that's the thing too, is you're not just looking at the physical performance, you're looking at how are they relating to that physical performance.
Yep.
Right? Are they relaxed with it? Does this feel great? Are they like, like that didn't feel so good? Are they concerned? Like, what's happening there? And that, again, that's one of our tips and our tricks and our cues.
Yep.
What's happening with that client? How are they responding to this?
Yeah. The other thing that we can do, we're talking about the senses here for listening, is tactile, is touch. Now, there are some people out there who don't feel comfortable at all using their hands on another person. And I respect that. I went to
and there's scope of practice issues depending on where you are. So we'll just throw that out there in terms of where you are.
Everyone knows where they are. You do what you have to do. But you and I are both, I was a former body worker. Okay. I haven't
Me
really
too.
practiced in a long time, but I have that skill set, that if I touch someone, I've developed a very light touch that all I need to do is put my finger on something like their trapezius or something like that, and I can tell exactly what's going on, what's happening. The longer you're at this, the more you're going to be able to see things, and the more you're going to be able to feel that energy through your hands.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's even just allowing them, if they're doing some scapular retraction work, either rows or shoulder extension or whatever it is, and you just want to get that scapula to retract, you can feel by just guiding them a little bit. I'm not pulling them into position, but I'm just reminding things, and you can see things begin to move better. Or if it's not moving, I can feel it in my fingers and be like, wow, this right side's not moving. Okay, what is it doing then? And I can visually see that, but in feeling it, I can feel that scapula elevate slightly before it depresses. Oh, no wonder your levator scapula is really cranky. Okay, it's pulling every time you try and do something with your shoulder. It's trying to do all the work. Got it. And by touching and guiding that scapula, I was able to say, oh, okay, that's what's happening. Now I know how to hopefully get rid of that and focus on other areas, or at least remind them, we don't need to we don't need to work on that. Just retract. And I do find with a number of my clients, by just allowing that assistance of my hands pulling them back slightly, and again, I'm putting a pound of pressure max. It's just more of a guidance. They all say the same thing. They say, I feel it a lot more. I feel like I can do it. As soon as I take my hands off, they say, I don't feel like I can do it as well. So, I do it for a few, then I back off. And if they need it, I do it for a couple more, and then I back off until they can get it right.
Yeah, so using tactile cues to give the body cues for how to do something, how to perform something, and give you the feedback about what's actually happening. Because there is oftentimes a subtlety in the movement, like I'm thinking of the scapula particularly, where it's like getting stuck in a certain place. Somebody does an upward rotation or a downward rotation or an elevation, and it's like one's got a speed bump in it. Like they're both moving roughly in the same way, but one kind of goes over something, right? Or to your point, one always is elevating because that levator is a little bit tight. And sometimes you can see that, and over time you get better at seeing it. But there's also that, how do you feel that?
Yep.
And then for a client, tactile feedback, both either yours or theirs, can be extremely powerful, much more powerful than a lot of words can be.
Absolutely. I was working with a client. It was my first session with her. And I always do a manual stretch at the end. And just to feel good, and especially since she's had low back things, I'll often do a little bit of gentle traction. I'm holding onto her ankles, and I just lean back. It's nothing major. And a lot of times I'll just wiggle their legs back and forth or do internal and external rotation just to loosen some things up. And when I did that, she didn't move. Everything was locked in her pelvis, in her hips. Her back moved, but she was not rotating in her hips at all. And I had to sort of say, relax, relax, relax. And what she did and let go, things began to move. And I actually saw her face relax. And she's 45 years old and just gave birth 9 months ago. So I'm thinking, okay, there may be some other things going on in there that we're going to have to address that, again, I would not have known because she is fairly athletic. She moves really well in a lot of ways, and then really not in so many other ways. And this told me immediately, wow, okay, her hips are locked up. But again, just by having her do internal and external rotation, because she was telling her body what to do, she was able to, but she couldn't relax out of those positions. So again, having that tactile told me that.
Yeah, one of the things too that two things. One, talking about how information comes through to a client and how it comes through to us, right? So talked about tactile cues and how that works, and communication. And there's one client, and this is a story I actually tell a lot because I think it's very indicative of how clients actually learn stuff, right? Because you can tell a client the same cue a million times and nothing will happen. And a couple examples of this. One is one of my teachers was working with a client, and they were teaching them running in place on the reformer, which is basically like dropping one heel, lifting the other heel, and alternating little heel drops, basically. And it is weirdly hard to teach. It is just something that doesn't, for some reason, for many clients in that position, does not feel natural. And this one teacher who's been teaching for 20 years at that point, or 50, I mean, very experienced teacher. This client could not get it. There was not, but they were intent on figuring it out. It was 10 minutes of running in place.
Yep.
And it was just fascinating to watch. I was actually in the other room at the time doing charting, and I was just listening, and it was like, wow, that is a real struggle. And again, how clients hear stuff or don't hear stuff. And one of the things too that I always think about is this is where having 100 ways to say the same thing is really critical, because you never know when a particular cue, even if you've used that cue before, will actually land. And one classic on this was a client that I had for 16 years, and I saw her at least once a week for 16 years. So it was a long time. And in a second, and she had a hip problem when I first saw her 16 years ago, anterior hip problem. And I was really focusing on having her trying to soften the anterior hip as she folded the femur in and kind of let the femur drop back and kind of soften the hips. 16 years later, okay, just 52 weeks a year times 16 years. This is a lot of sessions later. I basically said, okay, so like imagine when you're folding your hip, same movement. Imagine when you're flexing your hip, that it's kind of like you've got a pulley, and that femur is kind of going like around a pulley to come in. And she looked at me and she said, why didn't you tell me that before? And it was such a moment of really recognizing that as a teacher, right, you're throwing information at them all the time, whatever it is, right? Do this, do that, line that up, move that over there, whatever it is. That's what you're doing. And there are certain moments when I call it like their lock opens up.
Yep.
And at that moment you have the key to that lock. But until that lock shows up, or until that key fits that lock in them, they don't hear anything you're saying on that particular topic.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've had that happen so many times. Or
so many times.
You can say it over and over and over again, but it's not getting in. For whatever reason, it's not piercing what it needs to. You have the right key and the right lock, but you're doing it in a dark room, blindfolded, and you can't even find the door. It's not getting there. Yeah. But they will hear it from someone else. And what drives me nuts is when they hear it from one of my interns or one of my younger, and said, oh yeah, I worked with him last week and he said this really great thing and it immediately helped. And I'm like, I use those same freaking words. He basically just repeated what I said. He parroted me and you heard it from him. And of course, all I say is, that's awesome. I'm so glad that you figured this, that the two of you figured this out. And yes, my ego's taking a blow and I'm like, argh. But you know what? Sometimes it takes that second, third, fourth person to say the same words before it penetrates. You know?
Excuse me.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I always find that interesting.
When the time is right, the time is right. And when they're ready to take it in, they take it in. And it can be you, it can be somebody else, it can be, some third party that just says something that sparks what you've been telling them for 17 years. And that's just that's kind of the nature of what we do, right? Is we I kind of call it the shotgun method, right? We're essentially throwing a whole bunch of stuff at them one way and another, whether it's exercises and direction and cueing and corrections and all the stuff that we do. And some of it will hit, right? Some of it, hopefully, some of those bullets are sending out are actually landing and making a change. And other ones just keep swinging by, that right ear. And someday they're going to make that difference. One other thing that I wanted to bring up was a little bit that story with, the meditation gal. But sometimes, too, it's important to listen for things that are outside of our scope of practice.
Sure.
For other things going on. Because a lot of times we are somebody's primary person that they're talking to about physical things that are happening with them. Right? I mean, a lot of times you'll see your doctor every 6 months, if that, or every year. And, you won't necessarily see anybody regularly to deal with these issues. And I think of one client who came in and had hip problems and low back pain. And we did all the things we usually do. And it didn't make any difference, like no difference whatsoever, which is weird. Usually something happens. Um, and and basically I said, you got to go see your doctor again. She went to go see the doctor, and it turned out she had a giant fibroid on her uterus that
Mm.
was pushing on her right psoas. And that was causing both the pain in her hip and other things.
Mm-hmm.
One other client that I had a lot of shoulder pain. And, I know enough about shoulders to go, well, it didn't smell right. And I know
Mm-hmm.
for those of you, if you're a beginning teacher, your sense of smell isn't that refined yet. You don't really recognize normal and unusual patterns. But she really, like, it was just a really weird pain. It was not the usual kind of shoulder pain. And all the things that I did that would usually either make it better or worse didn't do that. I thought, well, this is just odd. So once again, I sent her back to the doctor and I said, hey, just have them check out your spine. And I was running complete on intuition here. I had no idea what was going to happen. But I was like, this is not your shoulder. I'm not sure what's happening here, but it's not your shoulder. It's something else happening. And she went in and they did an X-ray of her spine, and she had a tumor on her spinal cord
Uh-huh.
that was causing nerve pain into her shoulder, which makes sense because
Yep.
the nerves exit the spinal cord right there. And it was benign and that kind of thing. And she had surgery and it was all fixed. But it was just one of those things that didn't feel right, didn't smell right.
Yep.
The way the client was reacting was not as they would usually react with, let's say just a shoulder impingement or a rotator cuff tear or even just myofascial tensioning in the shoulder. It was something else.
What you said
That's the other
was,
thing too, is listening for the weirdness.
yeah. And for me, it's sort of, if you hear hoofs, you don't think zebras. We've
Right.
we've seen 95% of when people come to us with this, exhibiting these motions, this thing, it's probably this. But there is that 2 to 3 to 5% that if it just doesn't work right. And someone once said to me, if it quacks like a duck, looks like a duck, smells like a duck, but it ain't a duck, something else is happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's when you really need to do that investigation. Story that I've told many times. I had a client come to me with what sounded like bursitis. She came back from skiing and greater trochanteric bursitis. She was very lean, long legs, very lean, which, as you know, thinner people don't have much meat there. She lies down on her side when she sleeps. It was bothering her. So I said, I'm not here to diagnose. So I didn't tell her what it was, but part of me was like, I want to get you to get into your doctor. No, I don't have time. It'll go away. I would stretch her out. Things would feel better. We would work the area. Things would feel better for a while, and then it would be back. It would be back. 3 years this happened. Was not getting better. Finally, I forced her. I said, you've got to get into your doctor. And she said, well, I saw him at a party, and I mentioned this to him, so he told me to come in, so I'm going to go in next week. Fantastic. What was it? Greater trochanteric bursitis. Got an injection of cortisone. Fantastic. Should take, at least ease it a little bit. A week later, she goes, nothing's changed. In fact, it feels a little worse. So I said, you need to go back to your doctor now. Call him. Okay. Well, he wants me to get an MRI. I'm not doing that. I don't have the time. And I said, no, you're going into the MRI. I said, you're not coming back to me until you have it. Sorry, you're not doing it. And I'd seen her for years. And she said, fine. She called me right afterwards, the MRI, and she said, I think you just saved my life. I said, excuse me? She goes, you made me go to the MRI. I have a neuroendocrine tumor that's the size of a softball. That's pushing out on that so that there's my interpretation is there's constant pressure in that area. Unfortunately, it had gone on for so long that she actually passed away because of it. It was too late to treat. So yes, at the time I was beating myself up that I should have forced her, but I can't force anybody to do anything. I mentioned it. Every time she mentioned it to me, I said, get into your doctor. Get into your doctor. But again, it wasn't getting better, like you said. Normally what we do, things will at least feel a little bit better. You'll have some response to what we're doing. But
or given time, things can really change anyway, right? I mean, 3 years with greater trochanter bursitis.
Yeah, doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And that was the whole thing, is it wasn't making sense.
Yeah.
So again, now this is 20 years ago, so it was, I was still, I consider it, being in the industry for 10 or 12 years, still an infant. But, I'd been at this for a little while, but now looking back, I think, wow, I would think I would make different choices today. And again, it's about listening and seeing that I'm not getting any response. I'm not seeing any changes. Therefore, there must be something else going on. And that's something that really we have to sort of identify and watch. And if it's happening, okay, dig a little deeper. Sometimes it does take just a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
I have a client right now who had frozen shoulder and now it's impingement. So, we'd gotten through the frozen shoulder and things were doing great. And all of a sudden she started having shoulder pain again. And my brain is like, what's going on? Your range of motion's incredible and everything. And then I was like, oh, you know what? I bet it's something different. So I sent her back to the doctor, and the doctor said, oh, yeah, you now have impingement and tendonitis. So I'm like, okay, this makes a whole lot more sense.
Yeah.
So now we're not going to work it like we did frozen shoulder. We're going to work it differently. And it's just, sometimes that does happen. Things like an onion, you peel away one thing, there's something else there. But yeah, you have to be aware of that and keep all your senses open to take that in when you're watching someone, when you're listening to them. To really listen with all of your senses. What's going on? What's the bigger picture?
And that's our message, yeah?
Yeah.
Is listen with your ears, listen with your eyes, listen with your heart, listen to the emotions that they're experiencing. Recognize the dissonance between their experience and what they're saying, or between what you expect, how you expect an injury to ordinarily go through its life cycle and something that isn't happening. And just, keep asking questions. If something doesn't make sense or if something just seems weird, sometimes there's something in their history that you don't know about. I had a client who broke their femur when they were 9, and it really had led to weird things all the way up. Like that leg was a little shorter, it worked a little bit differently.
Yep.
A number of clients who had, and was one period when they did this, braces on their feet as toddlers, which just makes there was a disharmony. And all my clients who've had that, I've been able to tell very quickly when they do footwork, because there's something weird between their foot, their lower leg, and their knee. And it's like, did you have braces when you were, a toddler or, a little kid? I'm like, oh yeah, how do you know? It's like, well, there's just something's
not right.
Your tibia is in a weird situation. So just keep looking, keep asking. History, present time, current activities.
And something I want to remind our younger in the industry, I'm not going to say young because you can, only be at this for a year and be, my age in your 50s. But when you are just starting out and you're sort of developing your eye, you're developing your ear, you're developing all of these listening techniques, sometimes you don't need to worry about figuring out what's causing it today. Just being able to identify that something's not right. You and I, we watch people for a living. I go to the mall and I can't help it. I'm watching people. I can't physically help it. But you spot someone from across the street and you're like, ooh, something's going on there. If you can identify that at the beginning of your career, that's enough for now.
Yep.
Because you just say, oh, they might have a limp. You don't have to ask what leg it is. Just there's something going on here. Okay, that's enough at the beginning. Because then you can ask questions. You can figure things out. But being able to sort of see that and training your eye a little bit at a time. I find that too many of our younger trainers have a tendency to want to be able to fix everything immediately and know, their arm doesn't swing as far on that right side. It's because this, and this. You don't know that.
Maybe.
I
would say maybe. At this point in my career, I say maybe a lot. Like it could be that. Could be 17 other things. So I don't know till I really explore and examine.
Exactly.
And spend some time with it.
But it gives you now a little bit of a focus where you can say, oh, I see this. Okay, maybe I'm just going to look at that and see, does it lead to anything else? So for people who aren't willing to trust their eye yet, start there first. Start just by seeing, are there some anomalies? Is there something that stands out?
Humans have, scientific studies show humans have a very, very strong ability to recognize symmetry.
Mm-hmm.
For example, that's something that's absolutely built into our processing system, that we recognize symmetry like nothing else. So lack of symmetry, and I would really expand that most of us recognize a disharmonious movement pattern.
Yes.
Like you're walking along the street or you're in a crowd and somebody's moving oddly, it'll catch your eye, like look over, like what's happening there. So we have that ability. It really is innate to recognize kind of a graceful movement pattern and a odd movement
Yep.
pattern. And so just, yeah, focus on that. Just start to recognize that. And don't even, what I always do is just say, what's happening? What do I see? And then I just open my eyes and just go, I wonder where that's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try to have an answer yet. Stay curious. Keep your curiosity open, not the answer.
Yep.
Because I find the answer often comes too soon, and you close off the possibilities that may be the real possibility.
Yep.
The more you can just go, why is that happening? And then you start to explore, you start to look at other movement patterns, you start to do whatever your workout is, and more information comes to you.
That's a great
And
way
we'll
to
let that happen.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. If you're looking for the answer too quickly, you and I have both had this happen when you go to a doctor and you're starting to explain to them what's wrong, and you can tell the moment they've stopped listening and are just waiting for you to stop talking before they can tell you what's wrong with you.
Right.
Instead of listening to everything,
Yep.
and I'm a wiseacre, and every now and then I'll throw something weird in there when I'm telling a doctor. If I could see them tune out or something like that, I might throw something else in there and say, and yeah, I get this weird sensation right here on the bottom of my foot. And then that might sometimes make them go, excuse me, what? I say, oh, never mind. That's something else. I have an itch there. And again, I'm a wiseacre. I'll be honest. I'll pull that out. But when they tune out their brain and they're just waiting for you to stop talking, and I find this with a lot of physicians because they need to get out of that room as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
If we're looking for the answer and we're not listening to all of the facts, we may not get the full picture.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really sort of a key that we have to focus on is get the full picture, or as big a picture as we can, and try and figure it out. It's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle without the box. You don't know what it's supposed to look like. How are you supposed to figure out what it is? Try and see as much of the picture as we can, and then maybe things will start talking to you. Maybe things will come together and you may find what you're looking for. You may not. That's always a possibility too. But oftentimes it'll point you in the direction that you can head, and that'll help.
Exactly. It starts you down the path. And as you go down the path, like another branch will show up or a right turn will show up. But that'll help you get just on the right path anyway. But then we'll branch out as you discover more and more things and understand that particular client and how they respond to exercise and how they respond to you and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we covered a lot of stuff here today. That was good stuff.
That was good stuff. A lot in there.
Yeah.
A lot in there.
Awesome.
I'm hoping that was useful to you guys in terms of just thinking about how you interact with clients, what you're looking for, how you listen. Because that's the magic, honestly. I think that's the magic that makes us good, makes Brian and I's practices full forever. Is just that ability to listen and understand and really take in the information from the client in an effective and efficient way.
Absolutely. And so often people are just wanting someone to hear them because their family has tuned them out because, they've been complaining about something for so long. And the doctors tuned them out because, they're so busy that, they've stopped listening. Sometimes they need to talk. And it's our job to sort of listen to that story, say, okay, and then listen to everything else that we see. And again, get that sort of point of view that, oh, here's where I need to go. Here's how my programming should be. And hopefully get the right results in the end.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right.
Any final words? You got any final words?
I think I'm good. How about you?
Very good. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks very much. Again, Moving Conversations, you can get us at movingconvos@gmail.com. Check out our social media, Moving Convos on Instagram. Keep your eyes open. We're going to be doing a lot of things in the coming months that I think you all are going to be very interested in. So I'm just teasing that a little bit. So keep your eyes and ears open for Moving Convos on Instagram, and we'll see you next week.